Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. From October 2nd to October 24th, 2002, Washington, D.C. lived in a paralyzing fear over a series of random killings across the city in what is now known as the D.C. sniper case. The new Audible original series, Call Me God, tells the story of the killings and the manhunt to catch that killer in extreme detail, using experts, people on the ground, victims, family members, everybody that was really on the scene, including our two guests. Please welcome Jim Clemente and Tim Clemente. Let's give them a round of applause. Guys, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
You two, you put this series together, but let's go back. You were involved in the case. You were in D.C. when all of this was happening. So, what was it like when that first time it happened, like on October 2nd?
Well, on that first day, 6 people were shot and killed. And we thought it was a spree killer, somebody who was literally on the run, killing people on the way, and was going to just burn out and maybe do suicide by cop. But what really happened was very different. I was in the profiling unit at the FBI, so we do behavioral analysis, and we typically look at serial killers, and these were obviously serial killers. We just didn't know who they were or why they were killing.
On the other hand, I was working as a counterterrorism agent based in Washington, D.C. at the Washington field office. And from my perspective, seeing what was happening, the fear, the terror in the general population, because the victims were so random, the places they were shot, the times they were shot, the activities they were taking place in, when they got shot, cutting your grass, walking out of a store, pumping gas. All of these things are ordinary activities that everybody in America does.
Very public activities as well.
Yeah, and it's not something that you would think puts you in danger. Ordinarily, serial killers target a particular victimology, a particular type of person, and generally people that live a dangerous lifestyle. Prostitutes are very often targeted because of that. This wasn't something like that. This is you and me doing anything we might ordinarily do and possibly dying because we were doing that.
Right, I'm not a profiler, but serial killers by and large operate in a way that is in secret, and maybe they leave clues or they play around or something, but for the most part they're doing it for themselves, and they're not doing it to sort of strike fear into the heart of the public. That may be a wonderful byproduct that they get from it, but it's not the primary motive.
True, there's a lot of different motives for serial killers, and they span a spectrum, actually, and sometimes there are multiple motives. And in this particular case, what we found out, the overriding motive was that Muhammad wanted to kill his wife, but hide it in amongst a number of other kills so that nobody would be looking at him. He wanted to get custody of his kids back. It was a revenge motive. But Tim also saw some other motives hidden in it.
Yeah, I think terrorism was something I initially thought, and I don't think we can discount that completely. Unfortunately, fortunately, we can't ask Muhammad now because he was executed by the state of Virginia. But what he did, the types of victims he chose, times of day, the publicity he got, going to different jurisdictions, those are all things that terrorists love to do, because the definition of terrorism is using violence or the threat of violence to affect public opinion or public policy. And so everybody's lives were affected in that geographic area. Millions of people whose everyday lives changed. They could not go, they can't go pump their gas. They can't walk into a grocery store and expect to walk back out again and be safe. You can't sit on a park bench. You can't wait at a bus stop.
You can't go to school.
Yeah, you can't even walk into school as a 12 or 13-year-old. And so nobody felt safe anywhere. So I believe that his primary motive was to get back at his wife, get custody of his kids, and a secondary motive was he could be a terrorist. He could literally terrorize the greatest, most powerful city in the world, Washington, D.C.
You're working as a profiler, and part of your job as a profiler is to look at statistics, look at people that you've profiled before, sort of go through the files and look at what's happening in that moment and say, this person matches this profile that we've created. But he didn't really match any profiles, right? Even his motivation at the end when you figured it out probably does not match any profiles in terms of the actions that he committed.
Right. Statistically, in the United States of America, sniper killers are typically white males in their late 40s or 50s who have a grudge and they want to take it out on the public. In this case...
More like what we saw in Mandalay Bay in Vegas.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what we saw in this case, though, was a strange duality, because the actual operations, the planning and carrying out of these shootings and disappearing. He was a ghost and not decompensating over time. It was just, it's not what we normally saw. But we also saw in the writings, the tarot card that said, "Call me God," first of all, confirming that the sniper had a God complex. And then it said, "This is for you, Mr. Police," almost like they're looking up to the police. And Mr. Police is a phrase used often in Jamaican reggae songs. So we thought that this sniper at least had a connection to the Caribbean and that could be younger. But that was totally the opposite of what we see operationally. So we had to consider, for the first time in U.S. history, that we had a sniper team.
How often do you find, and maybe this is jumping off too much, but I'll come back to it, but as a profiler, how often do you find that the profiling works and doesn't work? And do you find that when it doesn't work, it can lead you down a dangerous path or the wrong path?
Well, I don't know, because profiling, what it does is you reverse engineer crimes that have occurred and try to narrow down the suspect pool. So basically what we do is we look at the behavior because it leaks out information about the offender. Each offender picks a particular victim at a particular time, at a particular place, in a particular manner for a particular purpose. And all those choices reflect back on that person, their skills, their abilities. And I think this case was a perfect example of how reading the behavior actually led us to say it was two people, one in his mid-40s, one in his teens, this one controlling that one, and this one actually sexually victimizing the younger one. And that was all in the profile.
That was in the profile prior to finding
Absolutely.
them?
In fact, when Malvo came out 11 years later and said that he had been sexually victimized by Muhammad, a lot of people doubted it. They thought, oh, he's just trying to get away with it and say this is the excuse. But we had predicted that 11 years earlier. And just knowing the culture there in Jamaica, where because he didn't outcry, because he didn't say anything about the fact that an adult male was sexually victimizing him, he was seen as a homosexual in a very bad way there. They still don't accept it at all there at all. And it was basically a death sentence for him if he ever goes back there. And so because of that, and because of the fact that he could have said, Muhammad was pointing a gun at me, that's why I took the shots. He didn't say that. He said he groomed me and he sexually victimized me. I believe him.
Did you ever find, I guess, you know, with a show like Mindhunter and its popularity, which is really, if I'm not mistaken, it's about the beginning of the profiling department in the FBI.
My boss, John Douglas, that he's one of the main characters in it.
Oh yeah,
he's behind that show. Yes.
Well, one of the things that talks about in this recent season is how sometimes profiles can lead you down the wrong direction because the killer or what they're doing is so far removed from the motive that you're used to.
Statistics can lead you down the wrong path. But if you look at the behavior and you look at the nuances, it will take you to the right place, as it did in this case. Because generally, white male, late 40s, early 50s, acting alone. None of those things were true in this case. But when we looked at the details, we started looking at victimology, and then the fact that they did not decompensate over time, and the fact that the communications were almost juvenile in nature, we saw exactly what it was. And my friend Jim Fitzgerald, who you'll hear about in Call Me God, who's a forensic linguistic profiler, said he saw Caribbean influence, he saw African-American influence, and we shaped the profile around that because that's what they told us through their behavior.
So what began with the profile, really the only part that was wrong in the initial profile was white male. It was the race, and it was because most snipers in history throughout the United States and in other countries have been white males. That's just a fact. Now, the fact that John Muhammad was an African-American male changed only that part of it. The rest of the profile was accurate in the beginning, and then it got built on. Jim Fitzgerald, that Jimmy just mentioned, forensic linguistics is his bread and butter. He created it for the FBI. And what he sees in the written word, all of us are blind to. So he can figure out very, very specifically geographic influences in people's writings, and you can't hide it. You can't hide who you are when you write. You can try to, and you can make things up, but generally you bleed through a lot of information. Whether you're male or female, it bleeds through in writing. And so that information, as the tarot card was found when that was Iron Brown outside Tasker Middle School in Bowie, Maryland, He was shot, 13-year-old boy walking into his middle school, and a tarot card was left there. So that was vital information. And then we used a scent from that tarot card to find the next piece of written information, which was a 4-page note left at the Ponderosa Steakhouse in Ashland, Virginia. And that gave even more information to the profilers to figure out who are these people. Because by that time, they were absolutely certain it was two, and they were absolutely certain of the African-American, the Caribbean influences, and that just got built up more and more and more, and it just became more precise. It was accurate from the beginning, other than the race, but it became more and more precise and accurate as it moved on.
Do you think the failure of a profile could be leaning too hard, not being adaptable to things as they change, and that can happen at times?
It's the first thing you learn when you get into the behavioral analysis unit, that you literally have to pay attention to every nuance, because tiny little things can change it completely. And this was a great case that showed us.
And it has to evolve.
Yeah.
It's not set in stone, and that's the way it stays. As new information comes out, as new criminal behavior is experienced and witnessed and observed, that alters what the profile will be, usually in a building block sort of way. Doesn't usually eliminate the beginning, but sometimes you can be wrong at the beginning.
What was it that made you made the department realize that it was two people rather than one, and a teenager?
Yeah, well, part of it was the duality, even in the tarot card, where it said, "This is for you, Mr. Police," like he's looking up to the police, yet they used the word press. Press is a word that sort of old-timers like me use, and it's not something that a teenager would use. They would use media. And so in that one communication, it looked like it was being written by one person who was younger, but maybe dictated by an older person. And then when Tim found the 4-page note, the same exact thing happened. It was in a baggie used for trick-or-treating. And it was on pink paper, and it had little stars that you would give kids in first grade, right, when they turn in a paper. And so there was a lot of juvenile aspects to it.
And just the handwriting itself looked very juvenile.
So it really was a dichotomy when you leaned it up against the behavior, the cold, calculated killing, the experience that basically bled through. We thought that the sniper had to have been police or military trained and saw action, either on the streets as a police officer or in the military at war. Because it's not easy pulling the trigger when it's a human target. A lot of people do target practice, but when you're killing someone, it takes another level of depravity to do it. And so we believe that was exhibited there, and we saw that there was no degradation in that ability over time. Usually, in a spree killing, you'll see them do a good job at the beginning, but all that adrenaline and all that running away from law enforcement usually makes them make mistakes, and that didn't happen in this case.
Both of you were in D.C. at the time, working in D.C. when it started. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what the environment was like between October 2nd and 24th?
It was unlike anything I've ever seen in law enforcement. I was a police officer in St. Louis, one of the most violent cities in the United States and in the world. I've covered hundreds of homicide scenes. I've worked dozens of, as many as half a dozen homicides in one day on the streets of St. Louis when I was a cop. So I've been in hostile environments. I've worked in Iraq during the war, spent a year total in Iraq, all over the Middle East. I have never been anywhere where every single person felt like they could die at any minute, and that was the situation in the Washington, D.C. area. There was nobody, again, cutting your grass, sitting on a park bench, going to a store, pumping gas, stepping on or off a bus, walking into a restaurant. Those are all things every single person does.
Right, and a number of the victims' family members had warned them, stay inside. Yeah. Tim told his wife, stay inside. Turns out she was at the gas station, at the same pump, where a guy was killed 10 minutes later. And two of the other victims, one called his wife, was on the phone with her, telling her, don't worry, I didn't go all the way into D.C. I stopped way south of D.C. so I'd be safe. And he gets killed that second. It was incredibly difficult to do anything in your life. They were putting up tarps over all the gas pumps. People were parking right up next to the grocery stores. People weren't letting their kids go to school. People were crawling through the parking lots so they wouldn't get shot.
Literally low crawling between cars to get into a store. You know, a woman vacuuming out her minivan, killed.
What is the pressure like on you guys in a moment like that, where the press, not just the press is sort of telling this story, numerous times a day, but people are also just generally terrified to do anything. Again, it's not like a serial killer where you can by and large, those things are kept fairly quiet now because they go after our most vulnerable. As wrong as that is kept quiet. That is more the case these days. With this, it was the biggest news story in the country, and then crazy in DC, and people were afraid to go outside. How does that affect your ability to do your job?
Well, first of all, you want to keep people safe. That's the primary objective of anybody in law enforcement. It's public safety. And we couldn't do that because we can't tell you who to look out for or what the bad guy looks like in this case. We have no idea. So building a profile is vitally important so you can try and give some information to the public. But at the same time, you have to make sure that the information that's going out in the press conferences, the information that's being released isn't A, wrong, and B, harming the investigation. And Jim can tell you what...
Who's going to wrongfully target people who may have some association with that profile, but are just a guy and a son driving in a car or something,
Well,
you know?
that happened because Chief Moose kept saying, look for a white van, so people only look for white vans, and police stopped only white vans. However, they accidentally stopped Muhammad several times during that same period for running red lights or being parked in a wrong place, but they weren't at all cautious about it. They had no suspicions at all because everybody thought it was a white van. So putting out misinformation can be very detrimental. But also, we told them that they should try in their press statements to appease the snipers because they have a God complex. They want to feel omnipotent. They want to take life from above and afar and feel like they are God. But instead, they challenged them. They said they were cowards and that the streets were safe and the schools were safe. So the very next day, they shot a kid on his way into class to prove their omnipotence. And eventually, though, we found the tarot card which said, "Call me God." After that, they listened to us because they realized what we were telling them about this God complex was very real. And the way to deal with that is to appease them, to say, this is in God's hands, or only God knows why this is happening, and we hear you. We now want to know what your grievances are. And that's the way to lower the pressure on them and not have them go out and kill again.
Did it lower the pressure on them? Did it slow down the killings?
It did, because they spaced out a lot more towards the end after they started using that press.
And they also used the second letter as a communication and outreach to negotiate with police, to issue their demands to police, and to explain that if you don't want more body bags, then you got to give us this money, meet our demands, call this phone number at this particular time. So the communication and negotiation had begun, and that's what you want. In any kind of a situation, you have a hostage negotiator, somebody's holding, barricaded up, and they have hostages, and they have them at gunpoint. Communication is the most important thing.
They're occupied.
Yeah,
right?
because,
But they're also leaking out information.
Yeah, they're giving you information. So from our perspective, it's important, but also for them, because most people, they have an agenda, and whatever that agenda is, we're not going to agree with it. We're not going to empathize with you, but we are going to communicate with you, because if we communicate with you, we can maybe bring the danger level down to 0, and we can end this thing. And that's what you want to do, because that's how you save lives.
What was the final victim number at the end of the 22 days?
Yeah, there were 20 people shot, 10 murdered. So it was a spree that actually started in Washington State. And Muhammad was training Malvo how to be a killer across the whole southern part of the United States and then back up into Washington, D.C. So it was a spree that actually started before the D.C. killings happened. But in total, 20 people shot, 10 murdered.
So the two of you are brothers, and you both worked for the Bureau. How did that happen? Did you guys grow up watching FBI on television or Dragnet, and we're just...
For me, it started, I think, at birth. I don't know. I've always wanted to be in law enforcement. I wanted to be a cop, and my mother convinced me you should be an FBI agent. He didn't even think about it. He went to law school and became a prosecutor. I went to college. I applied to the FBI the day I graduated from college. The next morning, I went down and applied, and they said, hey, you're too young. You got to wait a few years. I ended up becoming a cop first. He was a prosecutor here in New York, and then he transitioned. He got into the FBI before me, but I applied first. So,
well, I'm the older brother. I should be in first.
And you were a homicide detective for a little while?
No,
in
I
St.
was a
Louis?
street cop in St. Louis. I just happened to work in the most dangerous police precinct in America. We had the highest per capita homicide rate by a long shot. So I was working homicides every week on my beat. A small beat. I'm driving around like a 16 square block area, and like I said, I had 5 homicides on one Saturday and 11 that week. There are a lot of cops that work in cities that never see a homicide their whole career. I didn't go a week without.
But still, I would imagine a very different environment than random killings.
Absolutely.
Because most of those killings, I'd imagine,
Gang and drug related.
Right. There's
a motivation.
reason. They know each other.
Well,
yeah.
it's like what I said before. The victims were putting themselves in a dangerous lifestyle.
Right.
When you're a drug dealer and you're working against competitive drug dealers, that competition can lead to violence. So you're putting yourself in a violent situation, maybe unwittingly, but you're doing it. If you're cutting your grass, you're not necessarily doing something that's dangerous, other than maybe a rock being thrown up by your mower blades. But you're not doing something where you expect to be shot. Walking in a store, sitting at a bus stop, all those activities where all those people were killed, the 10 people died, none of them were doing anything that isn't ordinary life activity.
And how did you become a profiler?
Well, I started as a prosecutor, as Tim said. I worked a case with the FBI, and the FBI agent told me that FBI agents are literally just federal detectives, and I always liked figuring things out. And so he recruited me, and I came in, I worked violent crimes, I went undercover for a few years on the commodities exchange, I did big public corruption cases, and then I started working cold case homicides. And then I was promoted to the profiling unit. But I got the bug when I was in the FBI Academy, when Pete Smerrick, who was a legendary profiler, taught our class, and I went up to him and I said, look, I want to do what you're doing. And he's like, all right, kid, come back in 10 years when you have some experience. And 9 years and 8 months later, I was in the unit. So I really worked towards it. There's 25 profilers out of 14,000 agents, so it's very competitive to get in. But because of my broad range of experience, the fact that I was a prosecutor, I had prosecuted a lot of serious cases, I brought that experience with me and my own unique experience. I always loved studying people. When I was in law school and I was kind of poor, I couldn't really afford anything. I would take a milk crate down to Times Square, sit there and just watch people and learn as much as I could just from little snippets of their life. And that was perfect training for a profiler.
Do profilers ever get profiled?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm always curious about that. There's this old documentary that I used to watch that Errol Morris made that was about the guy who created basically the scale of evil, where it's like 1 is the most innocent kind of murder, where it's a crime of passion, and 10 is like the most heinous Jeffrey Dahmer style crime where the person enjoys torture. And he has a library of just books about murder. And at one point, Errol Morris asks him, like, do you ever study yourself and think about why you're interested in this? And he says, no, I don't. I could never do that. Do you ever wonder what makes you so interested in profiling and other people and their ticks?
I always thought it was an amazing opportunity to use your brain to stop sometimes very brilliant offenders from getting away with horrendous crimes. If you can figure out from what they do, who they are, and stop them, then you're saving lives. And to me, that's my greatest motivator. But in the profiling unit, I mean, you have a lot of type A personalities working there, and we're constantly banging heads. It's not exactly like it was on Criminal Minds where we all finished each other's sentences, but we actually challenge each other. And by arguing your points, you find either that you really believe in them or they kind of fall to the wayside. And it's by that challenging kind of round table that you actually get the gold that comes out of profiling.
We have to go to audience questions, but I want to ask a question. I rarely have two former FBI agents on stage, and we live in a very strange time right now where every institution in America is becoming extremely politicized, and I'm wondering what it is like for you guys in the past couple of years to have seen the agency become extremely politicized.
It's disheartening. It's one of the things when you go through the FBI Academy, first of all, you sign away your life rights the minute you get that top secret security clearance. And part of that top secret security clearance is the absolute necessity to keep your personal beliefs out of your professional work and to keep your professional work away from your personal life. So that means no professional relationships that lead to personal relationships and containing information where it belongs, as it belongs, whether it's classified or not. And unfortunately, some of those rules have been bent or violated recently, and it's disheartening. But, you know, we're human beings. It doesn't mean everybody's evil and nefarious. Some of the problems we've heard about are just human mistakes. Others may be more nefarious. We'll let the investigators and the people in the Department of Justice look at everything that's happening.
But sort of like a microcosm of the FBI agents, Tim and I sit on very opposite sides of the political and social spectrum. And we're still brothers. We still love each other. We still support each other. We have each other's backs. And all agents are out there doing their jobs. All the street agents are investigating, irrespective of who they believe in or what they think about the people in political office. And that's how it's supposed to be. And for the most part, it is. And unfortunately, recently, a few people that sort of made their way to the top didn't maintain that value system. And I think that's what broke down. But by and large, all of the agents in the FBI are still doing the good work that they're supposed to be doing.
We've worked under both Republican and Democrat presidents, attorneys general, and others, and I worked on the attorney general's details, protecting them, willing to lay down my life for multiple attorneys general that were both Democrat and Republican, that it didn't matter what party they were, what they believed. That's not my job. My job is they are part of the Department of Justice. We provide protection for them. That's what we do. And it goes on every day.
A couple questions from the audience. Who's a question?
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to know what you want listeners to take away when they listen to this story.
Well, the most important thing is the humanity of it. We want the victims to be able to tell you and the world what they experienced and how it affected their lives, because we think that you can learn from them. And hopefully, when we educate people who are being entertained, they actually can lead safer lives. That's really our number one takeaway.
And also you get the perspective of the investigators, not just us, but lots of other people that work the case, and what it means to them to be able to do what they're doing. Because we were just talking about, some of the problems in the FBI or other agencies, but again, we're all humans, everybody that works that, and law enforcement as a rule has been kind of disparaged a lot by the culture, but you'll see that the humanity is there. There are some bad people in any walk of life, but the vast majority of people really do care about those of you they don't know. They really do care about the average person out there and wanting to keep you safe. And you'll hear that in what's told in Call Me God. It's an incredible project by Audible. It's an original docuseries that our company, XG Productions, it was wholeheartedly and intimately involved in this because we were so intimately involved in the case itself.
One more question.
Hi. You guys kind of just answered this, I guess, but what is the advantage to listening to this story instead of reading this story?
Well, I'll answer that because I truly believe that when you listen, when it's audio only, it engages your imagination. So you're capable of actually immersing yourself in the story. You feel it, you experience it. And we tried to have it told, at least in part, in the first person present tense. So you can understand what the people who lived it were actually thinking and feeling at the time. And for me, it's so much more engaging than watching something, especially not to put down all the new movies, but CGI takes all that away from you. They give you everything. You can see everything. You have nothing to imagine. And I think your brain does an amazing job when it does imagine.
And on a practical level, you can go on with your everyday life. You can be working, you can be doing other things that you need to get done.
Working out, traveling.
And also be listening and totally in tune with what you're hearing. You don't, unlike where you're watching a movie where if you turn away from the screen for 5 minutes, you've lost half of what's happening. It's not a visual medium. The great thing about an audio medium, and especially Audible with the projects they put out there, is that it's immersive and you're in it regardless of what else you're doing. You could be driving if you have a long commute, riding on a train, an airplane, anything, listening to this, and what would have been wasted time now becomes very productive time.
Jim, Tim, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Congratulations on the series. It's called Call Me God. It's an Audible original series. It's available now for people to listen to. Everybody give Jim and Tim a huge round of applause for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.